Hi, welcome to the first ever episode of the podcast. Does it have a name yet as of the time of this recording? No, but hopefully it has a name and a thumbnail by the time you're seeing all of this. So I wanted to give you an overview about this podcast. It's going to be a bit more raw. It's kind of like my June Kickstarter video where it's an open-ended discussion. A lot of it will be about board games, of course, because that's the reason why all of this started to begin with. So I'll be discussing games that I'm excited about, games that are hitting the table quite often, or maybe different games that are coming up on Kickstarter. Just a lot of things that are board game related overall. Now, the other major part of it will be about photography, filmmaking, and content creation, which is my other hobby fused with board games. So maybe I'll be talking about important gear that I find really helpful, which in turn I think you will find really helpful. Maybe I'll give you like different tips and tricks about how to use different types of equipment, or talk about upcoming releases like the new Canon R5. And in general, just pretty much tips and tricks on how to improve as a content creator and how to make your videos look way more professional. And the tiny part of it, just a very, very tiny part of it, will be just pretty much about anything else, anything I'm interested in, whether it's about how frustrated I am about the Hulk not getting his screen time in the Avengers, which is a long-waited discussion, or maybe it's just reliving through old childhood games like Final Fantasy VII, what have you. Either way, the bottom line is that with each episode, the goal is to always provide you with some kind of value, some kind of takeaway message, or just different tips and tricks that you can use to implement in your own types of content. So whether you're on the way to work or making dinner or maybe even on a board game photo shoot, feel free to listen in, because the whole reason behind these podcasts is the same reason behind my YouTube channel, behind my Instagram, behind my brand as a whole. And that is, as I grow and learn, you will too. So we did do an episode of the Polymerization podcast way back when with my friends Nasir and Josh, but hopefully once everything settles down, they can join in on this podcast as well. All right, so today I want to tell you a story. It's a little bit about my photography background and how I got started into photography to begin with. But I shot with one camera body and one lens for 2 years straight. That is 100% true. And I want to tell you about 5 major things that I've learned from it. Now, I did write an article about this published in Noteworthy that I'll link down below in case you're interested in reading it instead. But this all started way back in undergrad. And I was responsible for setting up different events, mostly weddings and ceremonies. So we would set up like tables and chairs and have all these arrangements set up for the bride and groom and of course their bridal party and families, friends, and so forth. In the midst of that journey, you would of course have tons of professionals coming in, from DJ, coordinator, photographer, so on. One day, and I remember it very clearly, I was standing by the front entrance because we just finished turnover, and there were 2 photographers. One of them was inside the gate with the family and bridal party taking pictures around the venue. And the other one was taking product photography, or pictures of like the rings and like the shoes and all the accessories that go along with the wedding party. And this is all during cocktail hour. And we're all mic'd up so we can easily talk to each other. And I remember because I was talking to my best friend Alex, and so me being my ignorant self, I was like, hey Alex, do you seriously see this photographer right now? He's putting rings on a tree. And he was putting 2 of the wedding rings on a bonsai tree. And it was near sunset, so it was like perfect lighting and everything. Of course, I didn't know anything about that back then. But looking at it retrospectively, I knew the whole setup was perfect. But back then, I had no idea what the hell I was doing. I actually went up to him because I was so interested. And I wanted to see exactly how he's staging this picture. So I walked through the crowd, walked up to him. And I asked him, I was like, hey, can I see the picture you took? And he was full of excitement to show me. He was like, yeah, this turned out so good. And in my head, I'm like, no way. He seriously just hung like 2 rings on a branch of a bonsai tree. There's no way that he can make this look good. Like, is this seriously his job, is to take pictures of rings on freaking trees? So that was my bad. Truthful, genuine, but irresponsible thinking back then. So he was all like smiling and grinning and stuff. And he switches the camera from live mode to preview mode. And when I saw that picture, I honestly was in shock for a good 2 to 3 seconds. Like, no way. There's no way that's possible from a freaking camera. I can't see that physically with my eyes. So how is the camera able to capture that kind of image? So what I saw was sunlight just peeking through branches of the tree, reflecting through the diamonds. You can already picture how crazy good this looks already, right? So it's peeking through the branches to the diamonds, reflecting off in all sorts of directions. You have rainbows and colors and all sorts of lights, and it was just glowing. The rings were glowing in an evening sunlight for golden hour. The branches were kind of like caressing the ring. And even like the ground I was making fun of, it was a perfect contrast to the ring because it was clear, it was a solid diamond. So when I started to understand that you can capture these crazy cool images, and by the way, that was raw, that wasn't even edited yet. When you can capture these images with a camera, that is a totally different perspective that you can never see until you practice photography. And that was mind-blowing to me. It was captivating, it was interesting, it was something that really hooked me onto this hobby. So from then on, every weekend, I just kind of shadowed photographers, discreetly, not really discreetly. I kind of just walked by and pretend I wasn't doing anything, but in reality I was trying to learn and absorb as much as I can. I was trying to learn how they were directing people, how they were staging different items, from the rings to the shoes to the cufflinks. Not only did it make work much more fun, but it made me way more engrossed and entrenched and just immersed into photography, because it was so cool. It was so cool to be able to take pictures that just look so good. And it's something that you can't see until you're behind the lens and until you understand how to operate the camera. So fast forward a couple years, I came across a video that compared a $1,000 camera to a $8,000 camera. And that video, of course, was by Peter McKinnon, who is my biggest role model in the whole photography, filmmaking world. And since I saw that video, I've always wanted the 80D. Even if I was following around all those photographers from the wedding venue with my phone, it just wasn't the same feeling as if you would understand how to use a DSLR and having my own DSLR. Just different. It's totally different. So after watching a ton of Peter's videos and seeing what he can do with the camera and just being super interested in all the things, all the crazy cool things that he did with his camera, specifically watching that $1,000 to $8,000 camera, I really wanted the Canon 80D. My parents and my fiance had no idea. I only talked about it every other day of the week. But by the end of grad school, my parents actually got me the Canon 80D paired with the Canon 35mm f2.0 as a graduation gift. And I was super thankful, super glad to have this amazing setup. The one major reason why I got this specific setup to begin with is because I really liked how the Canon 80D was a crop body. I had no idea about full frames back then. But because it was a crop body, it multiplied the lens distance from a 35mm to, I think, a 56mm lens, because you're multiplying the crop factor by 1.6. So 1.6 times 35, you get around 56mm. And the reason why I got a prime lens is because it produces a really sharp image, and in this particular prime lens, I can also film really good video with it. It's image stabilized, so I can use that for both photo and video. And those are some major reasons why I got that lens paired with this camera. So in time with my new work schedule, I would get home and it would be too late to start taking pictures of anything because it'd be way too dark. It's after sunset, and all my photos just turned out grainy because I, A, didn't know how to use my camera, and B, didn't understand lighting setups at all. What I did start to understand was that my ISO can only be cranked up to like 800 before it started producing really grainy images. And even when I use flash, it would be limited to like the area I'm in. So like if you're in a really tall building, the light wouldn't really be able to bounce off the ceiling as well, depending on where your infrastructure is and how it's built. And there's so many other factors that go into flash. And if you point it directly at your subject, sometimes it gives really harsh shadows, or it just looks really fake and just not professional. It just wasn't a look that I really liked, and it was discouraging me from using my camera. So then my choices were limited to either I start taking pictures at night, or I take pictures on the weekend, which would be only 2 days of the week, and that would suck because I would rather take pictures way more often than that. So one day randomly, I was actually just staring at my board game collection, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? A lot of the board game pictures I've seen are mostly on tabletop. I haven't really seen anyone do any kind of creative shots of board games, and I think it would look really cool. I had no idea how to take product photography back then. So what I did was I took a game called Archmage, and I just put it in the front porch. So the board game was dead front and center along the stone walkway, and then along the walkway I also had the mage pieces along with the mage towers, and then the moon balls that kind of juxtaposed each one, and also had fairy lights that were haphazardly strung across the board game at the very end. So the payoff, so to say, was leading lines of mages and moons leading up to the board game at the very back. So when I took that photo, what really boggled my mind and kind of really stimulated my creativity was to see that the entire background was black. And the reason why that's important is because behind the box was just a bunch of debris and like cars driving by, and it wasn't a good looking background. But you can eliminate background completely by just using artificial light. And if you light your staging area properly, you can illuminate your subject while also eliminating your background and whatever you don't want to see. And that just blew my mind. I was so excited to see that. And it was finally a time when I can take a picture that was clear and without any kind of grain whatsoever. On top of that, I didn't have any like friends, family, or like models to take pictures of because either they're eating dinner or it was too late for them or they were just asleep by that time. And I didn't have any landscapes, of course, because it was way past sunset, so there was no way I could take pictures and light up a whole mountain. So that ended up being my only choice, which was to take product photography of board games. And it worked out perfectly. So the first major thing that the Canon 80D paired with the 35mm f2.0 taught me was that proper lighting conditions can illuminate your subject while also eliminating your background completely. If you know how to use your lights properly, you can totally take away whatever you don't want while also lighting up exactly what you do want. So then I started taking my camera out more often, and I started to take pictures of my family and my parents, and my niece who was growing up, is still growing up, will continue to grow up. And there were kind of two ideas that ended up connecting into one. The first one is you can't trust a 10-inch, 8-inch LCD screen, because once you blow up that picture in your computer in post, you just end up finding all of these blemishes and spots and just little details that you won't be able to see on a small screen. Secondly, aside from a given, which is shooting in RAW, it's that I had to underexpose my subject a little bit more so I can preserve the details in the sky. Now, a lot of the pictures I was taking back then, my subject was pretty well lit, but the thing is my background was like totally blown out. All the skies were completely white, and there was no way for me to, quote, save them. But the fix that I found to that was to actually underexpose my subject just a little bit. That way I can preserve all those details in the highlights, in the whites, and in all of those intricate details in the sky, from the clouds to like the blues, and all of that can be preserved if I A, shoot in RAW, and B, underexpose my subject a little bit, so make it a little bit darker than usual. And when I found that out and also started using dehaze in Lightroom, I totally brought back the entire sky, and it was insane because now you get a third of the photo brought back to life. So the second major thing I learned from this setup was that different cameras and different setups would give you different conditions for you to optimize and to adapt to and to kind of troubleshoot with. So only with experience would I have found out that 800 ISO is the max I can run with this setup. Only with experience would I have known that I had to underexpose my subject a little bit more for the Canon 80D. Because in comparison, when I use a 1DX, if I underexpose, I end up losing more details instead. So number 2, make sure you learn your camera setup and learn the little nuances, because those are the little things that will teach you how to be in sync with your gear. Now this leads me to point number 3, which is learning the limitations of your gear. So because the Canon 80D paired with this lens ends up being a super cropped image of like 56 millimeters. It's great for portraits, it's great for product photography, but it is terrible for landscape photography because you end up losing so much of the landscape. And you don't want that because you want to keep the entire picture in frame. So for example, when we went to like Moraine Lake or Lake Louise in Banff or to Mammoth Lakes, I would be surrounded by all these photographers. All these actual professional photographers that have these super nice setups complete with a 1DX and lenses longer than my arms and timers for the cameras and tripods. The gear was insane and it was intimidating. And here I am with my little 80D with a 35mm trying to squeeze in between everybody, and I for sure got like different looks and stuff because they're like, what are you doing here in a professional space? But it's okay because my eyes were enjoying the same thing that they were enjoying, which was the mountain, the lake, or whatever landscape that we were looking at. Not gonna lie though, I was 100% frustrated because I wanted to see the entire mountain range. Not this wee little mountain that's only like 10% of what you actually see. But that frustration taught me something really, really cool. And it's something that actually influences and kind of dictates my photography till this day. And that's learning how to differentiate your perspective so you end up composing photos that are unique and different from what everyone else is doing. I have the perfect example of this. So there was one time when we took a trip up to Half Dome, which is in like Mammoth, Yosemite area for California. And on that trip, there was a tourist site, an overlook of Half Dome, where you have all these photographers planted and ready for that golden hour sunset. And when I was there, the hard part is that you couldn't really back up anymore because there ended up being like a wall of people behind you, so I couldn't back up anymore. And my setup was already cropped in. So you have all these photographers with their tripods and super nice setups and just getting the entire landscape and just beautiful, beautiful pictures. Here I am with my dinky little camera setup getting like freaking nothing. So instead of getting like just this empty sky with a tiny half dome, I kind of just walked off to the side. And it worked out perfectly because when I walked off the trail where there was no one around, I ended up seeing a little view of Half Dome, which was coming through the trees. And when I saw that, I was like, maybe I can take something from this side and just, what the heck, like it won't hurt, let's just do it. So I crouched down, looked in the 80D, and saw how pretty cool it looked. It saw like trees kind of juxtaposing both sides of the frame. And then as I crouched down even more all the way to the ground, I would use like the stones and like kind of like the rock walkway to use as foreground while the trees were juxtaposing on either side of Half Dome. And at the very end, it was Half Dome itself from very, very far away. And you still see some good part of the sky. So you still see that golden hour glow projected onto Half Dome. And when I took that, I was really happy with it because I was in shock. Like, wow, I can actually take a pretty cool photo that's completely different from everybody else because I was forced to, because I couldn't stand where everyone else was, literally because of the limitations of the gear. So you end up learning how to really utilize and maximize your gear by understanding its limitations. And that's such a cool thing. So the third major thing I learned is that if you can't incorporate like the vastness of landscapes, how big those landscapes are, then I would suggest looking for alternate viewpoints, either at a low angle so you can get some of the water from a lake, or from a side angle that no one else is taking pictures of. That way you get a different, unique, and kind of a dynamic photo to the same landscape. It makes your picture that much more interesting because you're able to see a perspective that no one else can see, or that no one else is trying to see. And that's what's captivated me about photography to begin with. So that also leads me to point number 4, which is learning how to shoot in the right moment. When I was shooting with the Canon 80D and I was shooting like action images or people that are just walking by, I would always get kind of blurry photos. And so to compensate for that, what I did was I ended up shooting in super high shutter speeds and continued shooting, that burst shooting. And the Canon 80D shoots at like 7 FPS, which is not fast, but it's also not slow, so it's right in between. And I have missed so many moments because of shooting in that mode. Like, would you rather have 1,000 blurry pictures or one perfect picture that you can hang up on your wall and keep in a photo book and just have one to just cherish forever, right? You'd rather have that one photo that means something, that looks good, that is something that you're proud of, instead of like 1,000 blurry photos, which was a major mistake that I made because not only did I not know how to use burst mode properly, but I just relied on it and kind of just Russian rouletted it, hoping for the best. Terrible mistake. And they were definitely hard lessons because even though I wasn't the main photographer at the time and I was shadowing, I still missed the bridal party walking down. I missed landscape shots because I was busy fumbling with my settings. So I started to learn patience in photography. And you learn how to wait because there kind of is this zone. This is something like only a photographer would know. Actually got to sit up. So you enter this kind of zone for photography where you don't hear or see anything else, where it's kind of like in that one episode of House where, spoiler alert if you haven't seen House already, but House has this one episode where he thinks his senses are kind of elevated because he doesn't sleep. It's mostly because of the guilt that he's feeling from killing Wilson's girlfriend, Amber. But in these like slight moments, everything kind of just goes black and white. And it's just him thinking. It's slow, but it's as if time stops. And there's this kind of similar zone in photography where you just don't hear anything else except like that breath, that final breath you take, and you're just holding on to the shutter button because you're starting to learn how to anticipate movement and how to anticipate what's going to happen next. So you can take that shot with intention. Leading me to my final point, which is learning how to really shoot with intention and anticipation. So one of the last major things I learned by using this setup for 2 years was that you start to understand the distance it takes between the prime lens and between your subject. Because I only had one fixed lens, it was the same distance every single time, right? You can't just zoom into your subject. So I started to learn how far I would need to be from my subject, or how close I need to put things in front of the camera, how to compose different shots properly and quickly, especially when you're shooting with the prime lens because you always have to constantly move. So you want to minimize the amount of energy that you're spending and minimize the amount of time you're just wasting by gauging your distance improperly, especially during weddings when timing is crucial. I really started to study like the minimum distance I needed, in particular by doing board game photography, because then I had all the time in the world to just practice and see how much distance I would need between this meeple and my camera lens, or this miniature and the next set of miniatures that I'm overlaying within different depths of the camera. So to sum up everything that I've talked about today, the major takeaways, instead of focusing on gear limitations, realize that your gear is there for a reason, and that is to help you practice. And it's always good to practice on lower end gear or gear that isn't as professional quality, because if everything is done for you already, then you lose out on all those skills and experiences that you could have gained by troubleshooting and adapting with lower end gear, even if it's your phone, because that was everything that I used even before the Canon 80D. I took thousands of really bad photos that were improperly exposed, or had a blurry subject, or just too dark, bad in general. But each of those really gives you a hard-earned lesson, especially if those moments are more crucial, like a wedding or a family event or things that you can't take back. So because you have more at stake, you end up learning more and more as you continue to photograph. But you have to be thoughtful about it. You can't like go at it with the hammer, right? You have to understand the limitations of all your gear. What's the minimum distance you need to take between your lens that you're using now to your subject? How much further can you back up? Are you using a prime lens? Are you using a telephoto lens? All of these questions add up to your skill set, and you just get better and better by syncing up with your gear, and it makes you feel good. My last little story I want to mention today was that another photographer that I really admired was one that shot my sister-in-law's wedding back in Hawaii, and she was super fast. This is also before I even had a camera, but I saw how fast she was shooting a camera. I just saw her dial in her settings literally within a couple of seconds, and I was like, man, I would love to be able to understand my settings just like that one day. And I can say confidently now that I can do this blindfolded. I don't say that lightly or like cocky, but I say that because I spent so much time to really understand my gear before moving on to the next one. I really wanted to make sure that I knew everything, all the ins and outs of the 80D before I earned like the right and like the skills to move on to the next better camera. Because in reality, photography is, but it also isn't about the camera as well. So with that, I hope you found something helpful. I hope you liked my little story about how I ended up shooting for 2 years with the same setup before I moved on to the 1DX, which is the one that's filming me right now and also recording this podcast. Let me know your thoughts and questions in the comments down below, or you can find me across all of social media nowadays. If you've had camera struggles like this, I would love to hear your story as well. But until then, I will see you all in episode 2.